Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Rudy Gobert finished outside the top 50 in the Locked On NBA top 100 player list. I'll tell you 3 players who finished ahead of Rudy on the overall list that were not ahead of Rudy on my list and why they should not be ahead of Rudy Gobert. We'll talk about that, plus NBA expansion. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Hopefully you're having a fantastic week so far. Today, more reaction, and I'm going to call it fallout, because of my my vehement disagreements with a couple of the things we talked about already on the Locked On NBA Top 100 player list. So today we're going to talk about Rudy Gobert. He finished outside the top 50 on the big list. I had him, I think 46 on my list. I'm going to talk about 3 guys, and there were like 4 or 5 guys that were ahead of him on the Locked On list that were behind him on my list. I'm going to single out 3 and talk about why I think Rudy should be ahead of them on this player list. And we'll close today with a bit of NBA expansion talk as well. That's an ongoing topic, of course, of interest. We've mentioned it on the show before, but there's an athletic piece by Zach Harper that went through it earlier this week, and I want to give my thoughts on what I think probably should happen, how the NBA should handle expansion here moving forward. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, you can listen anywhere. You can watch on YouTube. You can also download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV and watch there as well. All right. Let's jump in. Let's talk about this Locked On NBA Top 100 list. We talked about this, Monday and Tuesday of this week. Lots of Wolves players, 5 Wolves players on this list. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll throw up a few graphics to give you a picture of where Wolves players are. So if you missed the show Monday or Tuesday, first, please go back, watch or listen. But Ant finished 6th on the list, just outside, of course, the top 5. I had Ant 5 on my list and Steph 6. The next Timberwolf on the list, though, you got to go all the way to actually into the 40s. You can find Julius Randle at 43 on this list. I had him a little bit higher on my list. I had Julius at, let's see, he was 43 on the big list. I had him at 39, so 4 spots higher. And then you have to go outside the top 50 to find Rudy Gobert. He finished 51 on the national list. I had Rudy at 46 on my list. Okay, so just 45. So 6 spots higher on my list. I had Rudy 6 spots, I guess, behind where Julius Randle was on my list as well. So I want to single out 3 guys that finished ahead of Rudy on the overall list that did not finish ahead of Rudy on my list. And let's go ahead and start with Desmond Bane. And I'm going to say what I said on yesterday's show. I like the way this is set up. It's basically going to sound like I'm just kind of ripping on whatever player I'm talking about, because I'm making the case that they're not as good as Rudy Gobert. Okay. I'm not saying they're not a good player. Desmond Bane's a fantastic player. He's going to make a big difference in Orlando. Orlando gave up a ton to get him. Of course, the Wolves gave up a ton to give up Rudy, gave up a ton to acquire Rudy a few years ago. So that's not necessarily the measure of exactly how good a player is. And also, again, as a reminder, this list is the top 100 players as I see it right now. Okay. This isn't a trade value column. So, like, we're going to talk about Amen Thompson later. Doesn't mean Amen Thompson is like whatever ridiculous trade value ranking he is on, like Bill Simmons trade value rankings, right? Like, yeah, he could be great in a year or 2 or 3 or 5. But right now, who are the top 100 players in the NBA? That said, you have to be able to look at what they've done recently, right? So you're taking the last few years of data. What's the track record of each of these guys, and weighting it toward what's happened most recently. So what happened last year matters more. And I'm going to get into, there's another play I want to talk about today that I think I had it wrong on my ranking. I had him actually a few spots behind Rudy, and realistically, I think you could make the argument either way. So I'm going to, after digging into this a bit more, I don't think I weighted last year enough on this other player that we'll get to later. We'll start with Desmond Bane. So Bane last season wasn't quite as good as he'd been the few years prior. He was 40+% outside the arc in his first 3 seasons in the league. The last 2 years, he was about 38.5% between the two, averaged only 19 points per game last year for Memphis. And obviously the Grizzlies had a disappointing year. Another season ravaged by injuries. And Desmond Bane at least was healthier last season than he was. Remember, he had the serious injury that cost him to miss basically half the season 2 years ago. Last year, he played in 69 games, started 68. Saw the minutes come down a little. The shooting was a little better. The overall scoring was not as good. And the playmaking for others was actually down pretty significantly too. Of course, now he is in Orlando. Orlando gave up a ton to get him. You could argue last year, certainly for Desmond Bane, it was better than his injury shortened year the year before. I don't think it was quite as good as his second and third years in the league. If you look at all the stuff together, obviously the 3-point shooting, the free throw rate was down, the assist rate was basically back where it was in year 3, a little higher and significantly higher than what it was in year 2. The steal rate was lower, the turnover rate was higher, the usage rate was only slightly higher, and the defense was about the same, which is to say he's a pretty good defender. But one of the reasons he didn't get drafted any higher in the draft, remember, he was the last pick of the first round, was because he has a negative wingspan. Like, he's just not a very big guy. He's like 6'5", but the wingspan is like, what was it, 6'3", 6'4"? So there's a limit to what he can provide defensively. He competes and he's decent on the defensive end, but there's a limit. Last season, he was good enough that I think you could make the case, at least, that Desmond Bane is something resembling a top 50 player. I have him at 53 on my list. Bane finished on the big list at 46. So 5 spots ahead of Rudy and 7 spots ahead of where I have it. Comparing him to Rudy Gobert, I think Rudy's impact on the defensive side of the ball is greater than what Desmond Bane gives you offensively. And I don't think I actually think it's significantly better. I would argue maybe Bane defensively is closer to a wash, whereas Rudy at times can be harmful to a team's offense depending on how he's deployed and, if he's in a mode where he's catching the ball consistently or not, if he's active on the offensive glass or not. Those were things that have been, especially last year, were occasionally issues for Rudy Gobert. But I think his overall impact, the gravity he has on both ends of the floor as a roller on the offensive end in general, and especially on the defensive end, where teams just try to avoid the paint because of Rudy Gobert. The never minds that teams rack up where they start to drive and it's like, oh, nope, Rudy's there. Never mind. I'm leaving. That stuff matters. Even if the block rate was down a little last year, it was the second lowest of his career for Rudy. The presence was still there. This is still a top 10 unit. And again, the consistency, the track record of Rudy Gobert being part of leading a top 10 defensive unit in every season but one in his NBA career, taking out his rookie season when he didn't even play 500 minutes, barely played in half the games, didn't start a single game. Take that out. Only 1 year, it was one of the years in Utah, was he part of a team that was not a top 10 defense. And that track record does matter. The only reason it's not a slam dunk is because last year was actually better for Bane than the year prior, and Rudy slid a little. Rudy's maybe showing signs of decline, and that's why we can have this discussion. And I don't think it's insane to have Desmond Bane ahead of Rudy Gobert. I think Rudy Gobert pretty clearly has a better impact, a more positive impact, I should say, more significant impact is maybe a better way to say it, on his team than what Desmond Bane has on his team. Now, Memphis still won 48 games last year. Of course, they crashed and burned in the first round against OKC. The year prior, they had all kinds of injuries and went 27-55. And then the year before that was the disappointing playoff year. They won 51 games in the regular season, second in the West, got beat in 6 games by the Lakers. And of course, Desmond Bane, I don't want to sit here and argue that playoff success is the reason why Rudy Gobert is ahead of Desmond Bane. That's obviously not the case. We know Rudy has only gotten out of the second round a couple of times in his career as well, and both with Minnesota. So I think it's close, but I would still take Rudy Gobert over Desmond Bane. And, I don't necessarily think Desmond Bane should have ended up 5 spots ahead of Rudy on the national list. Again, I've got him 8 spots below Rudy on my list. Next, I want to talk about Amen Thompson, maybe the most intriguing one. He's obviously we'll call him an NBA, well, I don't know, kind of a hipster pick, right? To break out and become a superstar, not just an all-star, but a superstar in the next couple of years. And I think the narrative surrounding Amen Thompson got a little out of control last year. It's not his fault, but I want to talk about why he should not be ahead of Rudy Gobert on these rankings. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at 5 Hour Energy. It is time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. This grape, ginger, and lime flavored shot brings the iconic taste of a golf course favorite to a non-alcoholic boost. Perfect for sinking birdies or making great memories with friends. It's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Whether you're out on the course or just need a little extra push to power you through your day, 5 Hour Energy Transfusion delivers the clubhouse flavor you love without ever leaving the green. It is obviously we're into fall now, meteorological fall, if you will, not officially fall yet, but still beautiful golf season in Minnesota and actually throughout much of the country. Moderate, nice temperatures for the most part. Get out there, get on the course. I mean, maybe you've hit a crazy shot and, it was a well-calculated miracle or perhaps a total fluke. And, maybe I don't know, like your performance, perhaps you felt like you got a boost from our friends at 5 Hour Energy. They keep you going on the golf course, long day, hot sun. Fantastic to bring one of those with you to the course. Make it feel like you're already in the clubhouse when you're actually just starting your back nine. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors. The grape ginger lime flavor of 5 Hour Energy Transfusion gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without leaving the course or chasing down the bev cart. Now you can amp up the fun even more. Just buy, snap, and enter for a chance to win a dream golf trip for two to any golf tournament in the USA. Tee up that trip. Visit 5hewin.com for full rules and entry. No purchase necessary. Excludes the Masters tournament. Any other golf tournament excludes the Masters tournament. Ends October 31st, 2025. All right, let's talk about Amen Thompson. So the overall Locked On NBA Top 100 list has Amen Thompson at 49. Ahead of the likes of Tyler Hero at 50, who we'll talk about in a minute, Rudy Gobert at 51, Joel Embiid at 52, Draymond Green at 53, Dame Lillard at 54, Lauri Markkanen at 55, and on goes the list. I had Amen Thompson down at 60. So I had him 11 spots lower than the consensus Locked On NBA list. Guys I had ahead of Amen Thompson include I had DeMar DeRozan ahead of him, and I'm not the biggest DeMar DeRozan fan. I had Jarrett Allen ahead of him. Dyson Daniels, I think, provides more on the defensive end. I mean, Amen Thompson obviously gives you a lot in the defensive end, but I think Dyson Daniels' overall impact on the game is greater. Denny Avdia, I had ahead of Amen Thompson. Austin Reeves ahead of Amen Thompson. All those guys were behind him on the big list. And Rudy Gobert falls in the same category. I had Rudy up at 45. So I had Rudy 15 spots ahead of Amen Thompson. On the national list, he was 2 spots behind Amen Thompson. And here's the thing. Thompson's a fantastic, exciting, intriguing player. I do think the sky is probably the limit for him. He has a positive impact on the game. There's no question about it at this stage in his career. However, I think we're jumping the gun a little bit on him being a top 50 player sitting here right now. And, I just think the volume at which what he gives you defensively is the primary reason why. Like, he's already just unbelievable defensively. The block rate and steal rate for a guy of his size and the way he plays on the perimeter is really impressive. The rebounding could be a little better given, again, his size and athleticism. It should be better. I think he's really good on the offensive glass overall, but on the defensive glass, he could probably be a little more impactful. The shooting is probably the biggest thing. He's a 22% career three-point shooter. Now, he's also only attempting how many per game? Like 1.1 threes per game. So not a huge volume, but if he's going to play on the perimeter as much as he does, and he's going to, I mean, you look at what that Rockets roster looks like right now. The three-point shot should improve a little bit. The free throw shooting is just 68.5% at 3.5 attempts per game last year. So that's got to get a little better too. He only put up 14 points, 8 rebounds a game in 32 minutes. So it's not like he was stuffing the stat sheet, but he's fantastic defensively. He made all defensive NBA first team. Okay. However, I don't think we can argue that Amen Thompson has the same impact defensively as Rudy Gobert does yet. I think it's hard to have that level of impact at the position he's at in terms of anchoring the entire defense around Amen Thompson. Like, that's not necessarily that's not feasible. The 3-point shooting, the lack of consistency on the offensive end of the floor for somebody who, is going to be asked to do a little bit more offensively than Rudy is. Everybody knows Rudy is not like he's the fifth option on the offensive end of the floor for Minnesota. And so for that reason, he's not trying to do too much. You don't run into those situations where, he's out over his skis. Occasionally in transition, Rudy gets a little excited, but overall, you're talking about a guy who the usage rate isn't going to be out of control for Rudy Gobert. It's obviously lower than Ahmed Thompson. And, he knows his role on the offensive side of the ball. Ahmed Thompson is a good offensive rebound. Rudy's good offensive rebounder. Rudy's a better offensive rebounder. I think the hype around Ahmed Thompson has gotten a little bit out of control. There's a period of time on the Simmons and Russillo would talk about, like every Sunday, it was like he was the best player in the league. And I think they had him as a top 5, top 10 trade asset, something like that in Simmons trade value. That is like, again, that's different because you're projecting out what that could become. And clearly he was a super important part of the 2 seed in the Western Conference last year. So we can't pretend like Ahmed Thompson isn't good. Again, I had him number 60, but I think putting him ahead of the track record of Rudy Gobert, we're talking about a guy and Thompson who's played 131 NBA games, has not even started half of them. We're talking just over 3,600 total minutes. A perimeter player who shoots 22% from 3. Whereas Rudy, 4-time defensive player of the year, still all NBA second team last year. Ahmed Thompson was part of a top 5 defense. The Wolves were a top 10 defense, both part of very big, very good defenses. But I think what Rudy Gobert was asked to do defensively in Minnesota was a little bit more. He was asked to do a lot more than I think people realize. There's a clip, by the way, floating around, and I had it and I lost it. I forget who it was that put it out on X, but it was all the times that Rudy was on the perimeter guarding in the playoffs last year. He was phenomenal. Like, you go back and look at, especially in that Lakers series, but across the board in the playoffs, when Rudy was ISO'd against somebody on the perimeter, or when somebody was ISO'd against Rudy on the perimeter, really, Gobert more than held his own. And that's obviously not where you want Rudy Gobert, but the Wolves allowed him to be put there, or allowed teams to end up in a situation where Rudy was pulled out to the perimeter because Rudy could more than hold his own and allowed everybody else to stay home. And you still have good weak side shot blockers like Jaden McDaniels, a very good one. Naz Reid's a pretty good weak side shot blocker. They still had other guys that could help protect the rim. And Rudy's still a more than capable perimeter defender. So I think putting Ahmed Thompson ahead of Rudy is jumping the gun a little bit. The sky is the limit, really, for Ahmed. I think after this season, we can have that conversation about, is he a top, 35, 40 player, and is Rudy no longer in the top 50? Maybe, but I think we're a little early. And I think there's a little bit more we have to see before we could project that out. All right. The last one I have is Tyler Hero. And this is the one I backed off of a little bit. So I had Tyler Hero on my list at, let's see, he was 50 on the big list. Actually, I had him at 50 as well. So exactly the same as the overall lockdown consensus. However, I had Rudy at 45 and the consensus had Rudy at 51. So I had Rudy 6 spots higher. I had Hero in the same spot. So Hero on my list was 5 spots below Gobert. And on the national list, he was 1 spot ahead of Gobert. The more I've dug into this, the more I've thought about it. I think I messed up with Tyler Hero. I somehow missed just how good he was last year when I was putting this list together. And remember, he had the big, playoff series a few years ago. He obviously won 6th Man of the Year several years ago, and then had a bit of a backslide, and just wasn't as impactful overall, really on either end of the floor, but especially on offense. The efficiency wasn't there. He was getting to the line less often. And now last season was a huge bounce back. And obviously things changed when Jimmy Butler left, was traded. And now Tyler Hero is going to be completely relied upon by Miami, and made his first All-Star team last season as well. So I think, the 3-point shooting was actually the worst since 2020-21, his second year in the league. But he was still right in line with league average at 37.5%, shooting nearly 9 attempts per game, which was the most of his career. He's an 87% free throw shooter, and he did start getting to the line a little bit more last season than he had at any point previously in his career. And the assist rate is still going up, with the turnover rate basically staying flat, the usage rate basically staying flat. So he improved a lot last year in his age 25 season, and I think has a real shot at being a good first option, between him and Bam Adebayo in Miami. So I think I messed that one up a little, and I'm okay with having Tyler Hero a slot ahead of Rudy Gobert. I think they're really kind of both on the fringe of that top 50. And on my list, I had Rudy 5 spots higher. On the national list, Tyler Hero was 1 spot ahead of Rudy. And I get it. I do think Tyler Hero's offensive impact probably outweighs Gobert's defensive impact. And that's kind of how I would compare these guys that are not two-way players. And Tyler Hero is not a atrocious defender, but he's not a great defender. Rudy Gobert is not an atrocious offensive player, but depending on the situation, he can be a negative offensive player. So you have to kind of weigh, where are you giving and taking here if you're comparing these guys? And I think they're really in really similar places. But Tyler Hero's dramatically improved on the offensive side of the ball, and so I don't want to completely overlook that. So I would put them both in very similar places. I want to close today with a bit of a fun topic. NBA expansion is back to the forefront of reporting, and it's something that we're going to hear a lot about over the next couple of years. I want to give my take on where we sit right now with potential future NBA expansion. We'll do all that here next to close out the show. All right, so the NBA has been pretty open about wanting to expand from 30 to 32 teams. Remember, we're only, 2 decades removed from going from 29 to 30 teams. And I've talked about this a little bit before. Obviously, Minnesota is the team that makes the most sense on its face to be in the Eastern Conference. Memphis is a little further east. If you look at the actual longitude, so is New Orleans, actually. But with the way the teams are broken up, I've long said I thought it made a lot more sense to stick Minnesota with Milwaukee, Detroit, Chicago, Indiana. And that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, what I haven't talked about on the show is the trickle effect that would then have on some of the other divisions in the Eastern Conference. And Zach Harper of The Athletic, who, of course, has been several places a long time ago at ESPN, does a good job overall covering the league. I like his power rankings. We'll talk about those in season. I think he does a good job with those. He breaks down the 3 different possibilities if the NBA adds expansion teams in both Las Vegas and in Seattle, which is the most likely scenario, is that those are the 2 cities the NBA adds teams in, right? Like, what are the other markets that are in discussion, right? Like Vancouver gets brought up, Mexico City gets brought up, Virginia Beach, I feel like at one point that area has been brought up, but those are kind of the big ones, right? Kansas City, less so, especially now with the addition of the Thunder. But the big ones are Seattle and Vegas, and I think that is the most likely scenario. And the West Coast divisions are very clean at that point. And at this point, we're not looking at 5-team divisions. We're looking at 4-team divisions instead of 5-team divisions, with 4 divisions in each conference. So Zach breaks it down like one version with Memphis going to the East, one with Minnesota going to the East, and one with New Orleans going to the East. So the one with Memphis makes sense for the East, but it doesn't make as much sense for the West, because all it does to the Wolves division is it takes Portland and sticks them in the newly formed, what Zach calls the West Northwest division, with Seattle and Sacramento and Golden State. Minnesota's still with the same teams minus Portland. So Denver, OKC, Utah, and still has to travel a ton. And it's this weird, like, Midwest division, West Midwest division. The East, I think, breaks down fine. The South breaks down fine. If you look at the South division with the Texas teams plus New Orleans, like, all that travel makes sense. It's actually probably the cleanest. It just doesn't necessarily solve the travel thing. So I could definitely see the NBA going this way if they just don't care about how much the Wolves travel, and I don't know that they do. This is just clean and easy. If you go New Orleans, I would actually argue it's similar in that regard. Now, the Memphis thing, Memphis still being in the division with the Mavs, Rockets, and Spurs, is still a little bit weird in terms of travel, but otherwise it's grouped well, other than the Wolves division. Once again, because Minnesota would have to travel a bunch. All you're doing is lopping Portland off and lumping them in with Seattle, Sacramento, Golden State. Minnesota moving over to the East makes the most sense to me. And yes, I'm biased, and yes, I want Minnesota to be in the Eastern Conference. But that makes the most sense. The only thing that's weird about this is trying to divide, I guess, Detroit and Indiana, because they're basically, like, longitude-wise almost stacked on each other in close proximity. And the other thing that Zach gets really hung up on is what we're calling these divisions. Like he tries to play around with the idea of the capital division in the East Coast, which gets weird because not every city's the capital, right? Like Cleveland's not the capital of Ohio. So how can you call it? Who cares? Like we'll figure it out. The other one is the Midwest, where the Wolves are currently. So if the Wolves get taken out and Minnesota's in a division in the Eastern Conference with Milwaukee and Chicago and the Pacers, and then the Pistons are moved into a division with Toronto and Cleveland and Washington, that leaves Minnesota's former division still with no Portland, but you add in Memphis. So it's Denver, Salt Lake City, Utah, Oklahoma City, and Memphis. So what do you call that? Just call it like the Central Plains or the Plains and Mountains division. Like, let's get fancy with it, right? Like, why does it have to be a direction? Could we just call it by like, the Suns, Lakers, Clippers, Vegas division, the Desert division? You can still go Pacific Northwest if you want to. So it's the Pacific, the desert, the mountains and plains, or mountains and prairies, or Central Plains division. That's probably better. The South can still be the South. You could still go Southeast if you want. You could have fun with the East Coast. You go New England division. I don't know if people on the East Coast would get angry if like, I don't know, Philadelphia is still technically, they might not like, I don't know. If people in Philadelphia not want to be called part of New England, it's close, right? Like some of those things, right? Obviously, hopefully the NBA would do a little bit more research into like what are people in these regions going to like or not like. But I don't think it needs to be, I'm not saying it needs to be like heroes and villains. Like they don't need to get super cutesy and like Hollywood with it. But I think if you do something that's like a geographical feature or whatever, that works. Or if you just really want to use directions, you could still go central, right? Like West Central, East Central. West, South, East, South. I guess once you get to East and West, then it gets weird. But that's where you can break it off into Pacific and Desert or whatever. There's so many different options. I think that it truly does make the most sense to have Minnesota in the East with the Bucks, Bulls, and Pacers. And if you want to swap, the Pistons so that the Pistons and Bulls can stay in the same division, fine. Like that's a little weird with how you draw the lines then on an actual map. But proximity wise, like who cares? I mean, Chicago to Detroit is not all that much further than Chicago to Indianapolis. I mean, it is, but on a flight, who cares? It's not that much farther. I think that makes the most sense. And I think the naming of divisions, there's a lot of options there, and I don't want to get too hung up on it. But we're obviously a little ways away from this. The can got kicked further with some of Adam Silver's, I think it was the finals press conference, or maybe it was the All-Star break press conference in February, where he basically was like, yeah, we're further out than we thought we'd be, essentially is what he said. Obviously, and Zach mentions this in the article, the TV revenue gets split up, which of course there's a new, bigger TV deal, as is always the case. And, owners don't want to give up that their pieces of that pie. They don't want it to be diluted further by adding expansion teams in very likely Vegas and Seattle. It's going to happen. It's probably 5-6 years away would be my guess. I mean, I think we're talking 2030-ish plus or minus is likely. I think at the earliest we're looking at 29 at this point. But there's a lot of fun possibilities here. It's been a while since we've seen expansion really in any of the, I guess the NHL did it, but we haven't seen it in baseball, basketball, football in a long time. So it'll be a lot of fun. All right. So I got for you today. A reminder, we are back daily throughout the week. So I will be back tomorrow on Thursday. Probably do a little bit more breakdown of the Locked On NBA Top 100, but we're kind of working our way through that list, and we'll look ahead to, if you will, start to preview some things as we get much closer to, ever closer to training camp and preseason play here. And I mean, we're like 5 weeks away from regular season play. It's absolutely nuts. So a lot to get to still this week. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder that the Locked On NBA Top 100 was voted on by the NBA hosts of our Locked On Podcast Network. The Top 100 was formed by experts that cover these teams and players every day. You can find the full list on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss my continuing reaction to the list. And we've talked about where Rudy landed. We talked about where Julius Randle landed, and my thoughts about that. So plenty of reaction coming yet this week on the Locked On NBA Top 100 players. Of course, Locked On Wolves podcast is also part of the very same Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.